Good evening, respected viewers. This is George from Ireland. Here I am in Moscow. Behind me is the Lenin Mausoleum. For hundreds of millions of people, this was a place of veneration for decades. And now, for people from outside the former Soviet Union, it's largely forgotten. People would have queued around the corner to get to this a long time ago. I've been in there myself. So, a bit about its sole inhabitant. Well, he's Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, born in 1870 in Simbirsk, which is a town on the River Volga, 500 miles east of Moscow. Mixed ethnic ancestry, and he was an outstanding student. His father being a school inspector and promoted to be an aristocrat. Anyway, Lenin was a dissident university, sent down, taught himself law, and was involved in the Russian Social Democratic and Labour Party, which later called themselves the Communists. He was in the Bolshevik faction of it, so he was exiled to Siberia, where he had a very comfortable time, even allowed a gun to go shooting, didn't have to work or anything, was able to give free legal rights to peasants. But he went abroad after his release from exile. He lived in London for a while. He was there in Charlotte Street, where the RSDLP had one of their congresses. And then he lived in Zurich most of the time. So he's fluent in German, but he couldn't speak much French, no English really. He was married to Nadezhda Krupskaya, but they were not blessed with children. He didn't even bother coming back to Russia for the 1905 revolution. Though in April 1917, after the February Revolution here, the German authorities put him on the famous sealed train, so he could come back, going to Petrograd as then was, and as soon as he came out of the Finland station, giving his renowned oration about peace-spread land, Russia must make peace and withdraw from the war against Germany immediately. Well, the rest is history. He wrote his April theses about the next step. There'd been an earlier book by him, What is to be Done. He was a prolific writer. Whatever you think of his actions, there's no doubt he was an outstanding intellectual. He published over 3.5 million words. And he led the October Revolution in 1917. Fainter hearts didn't want to go ahead with it. There'd been a failed attempt by the Bolsheviks to seize power in June 1917, the June days. The Military Revolutionary Committee in October 1917 had voted against it, most of them, including Stalin. But Lenin forged ahead anyway. That was democratic centralism. All about the centralism, not about the democracy. But he was then chairman of the Council of People's Commissars, equivalent to Prime Minister, and won the Russian Civil War. But he had some strokes in the early 1920s. He finally died in January 1924 of cerebral arteriosclerosis, and they wanted to preserve his body, so they very quickly had a wooden pyramid-like structure constructed, and his body was on display here for people to see. And they got a pathologist to preserve his body with various chemicals, and the display then became permanent. And obviously they rebuilt this in stone, mainly it's granite. So it's a pharaonic burial place for him. You can go in there. It's only open certain days and times. Queue up. It's free. You mustn't bring a camera or anything like that in there. Men must remove their headdress. One must always behave with decorum. There's nothing in there besides the cadaver of Lenin. On the walls there are a few red flags, but there's no writing. There's no other imagery apart from that. And his sarcophagus is illuminated, so he's regularly bathed in various fluids to keep his body fresh. It appears as though he just died yesterday. He's rather a short man, and curiously you'll notice one of his hands is closed and the other is open. Presumably that was the attitude in which he passed away. So there has been talk since the early 90s of reburying him in St. Petersburg, in the grave beside his mother. That it hasn't come to pass, and those who are still communists insist that he stay here. Tourist companies still want him here. So it's an extraordinarily significant figure. I could speak about him for an hour. But anyway, it's well worth seeing this unique site. There used to be other communist leaders around the world whose bodies were preserved for decades. That's all for the moment from the Lenin Mausoleum.